In the opening scenes, a man is seen tidying up the house while crying, hinting at something tragic that occurred there. Emma and her boyfriend Simon are planning to rent a smart house that resembles an art gallery. 3 years later, Jane is looking to rent the same house. The rent is affordable, but tenants must adhere to strict rules set by the owner, who is also the architect and creator of the house. These rules include no paintings, decorations, carpets, books, children, or planting in the garden. A special bracelet allows automatic control of the smart home system. After meeting with the realtors, the homeowner always personally interviews potential tenants, usually rejecting most due to his high standards. Simon doesn't like these conditions, but Emma is thrilled with the house, as is Jane in the present time. Simon remains hesitant, wanting to consider other options. Jane reviews the applicant questionnaire, noting that the first question asks for 5 essential items, indicating the owner's minimalist approach. Jane's friend Mia finds the conditions strange. Emma is enthusiastic about living in the house, while Simon is still against it, leading to conflict between them. Jane is trying to escape her past, with her current house's nursery bringing back heavy memories. Simon eventually agrees to attend the interview for the smart house, doing it only for Emma. Edward Montford, the owner, asks why they want to live in the house. Emma replies that it's a dream come true, and that she and Simon could be worthy tenants. She believes the house will change their lives for the better. Their previous house was robbed while Simon was out with friends and Emma was alone, so now she wants to feel safe. Nervous, Emma accidentally spills coffee on Edward's blueprints, but he assures her it's fine and thanks them for the meeting, promising to inform them of the results later. In the present, Jane also attends an interview for the house. Edward has a minor conflict with Paul Ellis, his partner. Edward explains to Jane that the smart home system collects real-time data about the residents to enhance their experience, which is the price tenants pay for comfort. Edward has not found a suitable tenant for 3 years, but feels his search might be over. Miss Cavendish promises to preserve the uniqueness of the house. When asked why he doesn't live there himself, Edward replies that he couldn't build the house he envisioned. The conversation is interrupted by Peter Creed, his technical partner, with an urgent matter. Jane asks the secretary why Edward didn't build the house he envisioned. The secretary explains that the house was supposed to be a family home, but Edward's wife and son perished, and he usually doesn't mention it. Emma visits a psychotherapist to cope with the emotional trauma after the robbery, knowing that Simon feels guilty for not being home that night, while Emma blames herself. Jane intends to return to work. Her boss Rachel and colleagues sympathize with her, but returning to work is not easy. Jane was supposed to go on maternity leave, and another employee is now replacing her. Rachel explains that she can't just fire that employee due to contractual obligations, but promises to help Jane. In the past, Emma, who works at a water cooler sales company, is developing an advertising strategy. She used to imagine a career in marketing to be more interesting. Checking her email, Emma is thrilled to learn that Edward has approved her and Simon's application. In the present, Jane also learns that her application was approved. Emma and Simon are packing up, preparing to move, as is Jane. Jane was supposed to become a mother, but misfortune struck. She puts on the bracelet that allows her to control the smart home system and sees a bouquet of flowers at the doorstep. Both Emma and Jane are settling into their new place, believing this is the happy beginning of their new lives. Simon familiarizes himself with the capabilities of the Home Assistant artificial intelligence. Initially, he didn't want to live there, but has changed his mind. Jane is surprised when her electric toothbrush stops working as soon as the timer ends. Simon has no regrets about moving. Next week is Emma's birthday, and she wants to throw a party. Simon is unsure if parties are allowed in the house, but Emma believes they have the right to invite friends to the house they are paying for. When Emma suggested inviting Edward, Simon found it strange. At first glance, the house seems perfect, but what lies behind this facade? Despite her pain, Jane exercises to distract herself. This morning, she found another bouquet of flowers at her doorstep, which had happened repeatedly. Jane called the secretary, Alicia, and said it was too much. The last bouquet had a note, "Emma, I will love you forever." Alicia assured her that the flowers were not sent by their company. After cooking dinner, Jane invited her friends Mia, her husband Charlie, and their kids. Jane was afraid the children might damage something in the house. Charlie mentioned that a man outside had left flowers. Jane caught up with the man, who turned out to be Simon. He explained that he brings flowers in memory of his late girlfriend, Emma, who would have turned 30 that week. Jane was horrified to learn that Emma had passed away in the house 3 years ago under unclear circumstances. This made Jane anxious, but her friends tried to calm her down. That evening, Jane found information online about the unexplained demise of a girl in the house. In the past, Simon and Emma were preparing for her birthday party. All the guests were thrilled with the smart house. Emma got drunk and danced, trying to forget herself. Then Saul Cosby, Simon's friend and colleague, suggested everyone go to a club, but the couple was too tired and went to bed. Simon wanted some affection from Emma, but she still didn't feel safe and needed time. When Simon said he loved her, she didn't respond. Something was wrong with the house. In the morning, Emma received a call from the police. The detectives were already outside and wanted to talk to them, possibly because they had caught the robber. Simon and Emma hurriedly tidied themselves up. The detectives said that a person matching Emma's description was arrested for another burglary. The detectives asked to speak with Emma, the only witness to the robbery, alone. However, Simon wanted to stay to support her. Simon learned for the first time that the robber not only threatened Emma, but also did unacceptable things to her. She had hidden this from the police and her boyfriend because the criminal recorded everything on his phone and threatened to send the video to her family and friends. As she recounted this, Emma cried. The detectives promised to do everything possible to put the man in jail. After they left, Simon asked Emma why she didn't tell him right away. Emma replied that she was scared and afraid that Simon wouldn't understand. Jane went back to work and met with Richard, a client who asked how she was handling her role as a mother. The conversation was interrupted by Belinda Best, who was replacing Jane. She led the client away, ignoring Jane. Jane did not expect to see Edward, who had come to apologize for not initially telling her about the previous tenants. According to Edward, it was an accident on the stairs. Unexpectedly, Jane suggested having coffee, and he agreed. Edward had already overheard that Jane lost her daughter during childbirth. She said she wanted to name her daughter Isabel. Edward understood Jane like no one else because he lost his son and has felt an emptiness inside, just like Jane. Now the police are investigating whether the doctors who did not perform a C-section on Jane are at fault. What happened was wrong. Unable to hold back, Jane burst into tears. Edward took her hand as a sign of support. Thinking that Edward had made Jane cry, the waitress called him a jerk. Jane did not expect to hear from Edward that he wanted to start a relationship with her. This guy is clearly extremely straightforward. Edward explained that he doesn't see the need to waste time on courtesies, dates, and other nonsense. For him, practicality and minimalism are important. Jane replied that she is not ready for any relationship right now. She needs to get back to work because her break is almost over. That same day, Edward sent Jane a bouquet of flowers. In the past, Emma's colleague and friend Amanda found online that the architect's wife and son perished in the smart house when a wall collapsed on them. After that, Edward Montford rebuilt the house in a radical minimalist style. Judging by the photograph, Edward's late wife looked a lot like Emma. Simon prepared dinner for Emma to cheer her up and gave her a small gift, a decorative teapot. The couple believed that everything in their lives would be fine from then on. The second question on the tenant application form is whether you would be happy with a second-rate partner. Jane put the flowers in a vase. In the past, Simon stopped seeing Emma as a girl because he couldn't stop thinking about what the robber did to her. This upset Emma greatly. Simon loved her, which made it hard for him to stop thinking about it. Unexpectedly, Emma said they needed to break up. She felt trapped, and her love for Simon had long since cooled. Emma wanted Simon to move out, so he packed his things and left. Jane constantly thinks about what happened to Emma in the house. Suddenly, the home assistant turned on a song. Under the influence of alcohol, Jane started wandering around the house and dancing. When the music stopped playing, Jane called Edward and said she was ready to try a relationship with him. After Simon left, Emma drank and danced in an attempt to forget, but terrible memories from the past still haunted her. At one point, she lay on the floor sobbing. In the present, Jane told her friend that Edward proposed a relationship free of any conventions. Mia found it strange that even after the accident on the stairs, Edward never installed railings. The third item on the questionnaire asks if you agree that in a well-run society, breaking the rules should have consequences. Emma continued to see a psychotherapist. Despite not being at fault, she somehow felt ashamed of what happened. Emma could not enjoy life at that moment. Changing homes did not help. Jane was haunted by nightmares about Emma's demise. The realtors came for an inspection to see if Jane had broken any rules, as per the contract conditions. When asked what she knew about the girl who lived there before, Realtor Camila replied that she knew nothing. When the cleaner picked up a certain box, Jane didn't like it because it contained something personal. Emma's boss, Saul, thought she shouldn't have broken up with Simon because he was a good guy. Emma called Edward and informed him that Simon had moved out. Edward suggested they meet and look at a building. Just like Jane in the present, she had never had such dates before. Jane was intrigued. In the past, Emma said she didn't like churches because their pomp had nothing to do with faith. Edward explained that for him, it was primarily architectural heritage. In the present, Edward told Jane that he doesn't live anywhere permanently, spending most of his time at construction sites. The only thing Emma liked about churches was the acoustics. Once, Edward and his wife got married in a church, making it special for him. Later, at a cafe, Emma and Edward discussed the updated lease agreement. Unexpectedly, he proposed a relationship free of any conventions, essentially repeating the same words he had said to Jane earlier. Edward believed that if people had to divorce after a certain period, they would value each other much more when entering a marriage. Jane asked Edward how his family perished. He replied that it was an accident at a construction site, without going into details. Edward was different from anyone Jane had ever known. She had no prior experience with such relationships. In the past, Edward told Emma that he wanted to cook dinner for her. He intended to kiss Emma, but she pulled away. Jane thanked Edward for the pleasant evening. Unexpectedly, she asked about Emma Matthews. Edward evasively replied that he didn't know that girl very well. At work, Emma found a bouquet of flowers, but it was not from Edward. It was from Simon. However, Emma lied to Amanda that the flowers were from Edward. Emma asked Andrew, a successful lawyer working at their firm, how to draft an addendum to the lease agreement. Andrew promised to help. Emma received a call from Detective Sergeant Liz Willen, who said there was news about her case. The detective would be waiting for Emma on Monday. She still could not recover from the trauma of the past. At work, Jane received a package. Seeing her colleague with a baby, Jane hurried to another room where she let her emotions out. In the package was a beautiful evening dress from Edward. In the past, Emma received the same gift. Jane didn't expect any romantic gesture from Edward. He said he wanted to cook dinner for her. The next question on the questionnaire asked if you expect your partner to meet your standards. Emma didn't want to see anything in the house that reminded her of Simon. Drunky showed up and suggested they reconcile, but Emma made it clear that there could be nothing more between them. Edward called Emma and asked her to hand the phone to Simon. Edward stated that he would come over for dinner tonight and that he no longer wanted to see Simon in the house. Simon doesn't understand how Emma could do this to him. Jane still hasn't fully recovered her figure after childbirth, but the dress Edward gave her hides her flaws. In the past, Emma also waited for Edward in the dress he gave her. In both the past and present, he told the girl she looked perfect. They kissed for the first time, and it turned into passion. The past intertwines with the present. After that, Edward and Jane had an honest conversation. Memories of her daughter brought tears to Jane's eyes. Edward comforted her, casually mentioning that he can't stand tattoos on women. In the past, Edward didn't like seeing the decorative teapot, a gift from Simon, in the kitchen. He supposedly accidentally broke it. Emma assured him it was fine. In the morning, Jane got nervous not seeing Edward beside her. She received a message from a worried friend who was planning to visit her soon. Jane panicked when she discovered that the smart house had disabled all amenities until she answered all the questions in the questionnaire. Emma arrived at the police station. The detectives informed her that Ray Nelson would not only be charged with the robberies. Emma is not sure if she can handle this and attend the trial. The detectives assured her that there is nothing to fear. Ray Nelson must face the deserved punishment. The investigation never established the exact cause of her daughter's demise. The doctor's guilt was not proven. Jane would like to know the exact answer, but there isn't one. The expert said that unfortunately, this sometimes happens. At home, Jane cried holding that very box. In it, she keeps ultrasound screenings and other things that remind her of her daughter. Jane feels guilty, thinking that everything could have been different if she had paid attention to some alarming symptoms right away. Andrew, who helped Emma draft the addendum to the lease agreement, found a record on the housing planning portal that 2 people are buried under Emma's house. This was officially entered into the registry. Emma tried to pretend that this did not bother her at all. Right now, all her thoughts are occupied with the upcoming trial. Emma feels ready to scream from helplessness. Suddenly, she noticed a fox in the home garden. Edward prepared dinner for Jane. She mentioned that the last time he left in the middle of the night, the house made her take the survey again. Jane doesn't like feeling like an experiment. Edward calmly replied that it was part of the terms of the contract. Emma asked Edward what his wife was like. He He dodged the question. Suddenly, Emma confessed that she had been a victim of a crime in the past. This is one of the reasons for her breakup with Simon. However, with Edward, Emma feels safe and ready to move on. Emma also did not hide that she knows that Edward's late wife, Elizabeth, is buried here. Edward explained that this is an ancient Japanese custom. Emma is not scared by this. Soon, she received a subpoena. Periodically, tours are conducted in the house for employees of the Institute of Architecture and Technology. The house is fully automated and even has a connection with Jane's computer, though she is unaware of it. Jane was outraged to see Peter rummaging through her closet. He laughed and said that residents cannot expect privacy if they want to live in a house they can't afford. Later, Edward calmly explained that Peter's cavalier attitude is offset by his professionalism. Emma is annoyed by the frequent need to complete the survey. Later, she met with Detective Clark and her lawyer to discuss some changes. Ree Nelson had changed his mind and refused to plead guilty. Both his lawyer and the judge believed that the video evidence was insufficient to prove guilt. Emma would now have to testify in court. Following recent events, Nelson was released on bail. Emma, being the victim, couldn't hold back her emotions. She went outside to calm down and saw Ray Nelson, which strengthened her resolve to testify to ensure Nelson would be imprisoned soon. The hearing took place at night. Jane woke up to some noise and noticed a door in the wall. She opened it and found herself in a room housing the entire smart home system. There, she discovered Emma's belongings, including the business card of her psychotherapist. "Help Me" was scratched into the wall. Jane shared her findings with Mia, who, after Googling the name Emma Matthews, noted the striking resemblance to Jane. Both women also greatly resembled Elizabeth Montford, Edward's late wife. Jane visited the address on the business card to speak with Emma's psychotherapist. Initially, the doctor thought Jane was Emma's sister due to their similar appearance. The doctor mentioned that patient confidentiality does not end with the patient's demise. Jane explained that she now lived in Emma's former house and was dating Edward, the architect. Hearing Edward's name, the doctor stated that confidentiality could be breached to prevent harm to another person. Learning that Edward and Emma had been dating shocked Jane. The doctor warned Jane that she was in danger. Jane was confused since Edward had never shown aggression. The psychotherapist asked if Jane found Edward's need to control everything abnormal, suggesting that his preference for women who resemble his late wife indicates a psychological disorder. Jane couldn't understand this, as like Emma, she was going through a tough time when Edward chose her. Edward took Jane to a museum, and she tried to act as if everything was fine. Edward disliked Jane's interest in seeing all the exhibits, believing one should focus on just one exhibit per visit. Jane casually mentioned finding a storage room in the house. Edward responded that the realtor should have shown it to her. When Jane directly asked if he had a relationship with Emma, Edward didn't deny it, but stated he doesn't discuss past relationships. Jane already knew that following rules was important to Edward. After cross-examination, Emma struggled to maintain her composure. According to the judge, there was no physical evidence against Nelson, no fingerprints or DNA traces. Jane felt unwell due to the prolonged trial, and Emma fell into depression. Jane bought pregnancy tests, and her worst fears were confirmed. Unsure of what to do, Jane wasn't ready to face that pain again. Mia supported her friend, but Jane was uncertain about telling Edward about the pregnancy. Mia suspected Edward might have been involved in Emma's demise. If Jane couldn't ask Edward about it, she should ask someone else. The next survey question was whether there is a right solution in any situation. Emma couldn't bear her current situation and had to identify the criminal in the presence of the inspector. Without this, all charges against Nelson would be dropped despite his breaking into her house, and he would continue his actions. Detective Clark regretted not keeping his promise and allowing Nelson to be released on bail. If Emma continued to testify, the jury would surely believe her. Outside, Emma felt she was being followed. Jane wanted to undergo all possible medical examinations to prevent another tragedy. She found contacts online for an organization that helps expectant parents in such situations. Later, she met with a consultant and shared her concerns. Jane still believed she could have prevented the loss of her daughter. After reviewing her medical record, the consultant pointed out a serious mistake made by the midwife. Jane had all the indications for a cesarean section. When Jane heard this, her world turned upside down. Could it be that incompetent doctors were to blame? Emma felt tired. Edward gave her a gift, an expensive necklace. He gave the same necklace to Jane in the present, but neither of the women was pleased with the gift. Edward is often busy with work, which greatly upsets Emma. Edward offered her to live together, and the girl gladly agreed. He proposed the same to Jane. She reacted more reservedly but was still pleased. Edward asked the home assistant to play some slow music. Until that moment, Jane didn't know that the smart home had voice control and a microphone system. Edward would clearly prefer Jane to ask fewer questions. In the morning, Edward was getting ready for a business trip to Bristol. He wanted to build an entire safe neighborhood of smart homes. Emma didn't want to let her beloved go. Jane went back to the storage room, hearing a baby crying. It turned out to be just a nightmare. In the morning, Jane again did not find Edward next to her. In the past, Emma was upset that Edward spent so much time working. He said he couldn't let everything fall apart and left. Jane met with Simon, asking if he found Emma's demise suspicious. Simon had no doubt that it was the landlord, Edward Monkford, who took Emma's life. A few days before the tragedy, Emma called Simon and said that Edward had changed a lot and was scaring her. Simon tried to help his ex-girlfriend but couldn't. The police had no evidence that it was a crime and not an accident. In the past, Emma saw her colleague Amanda crying in the restroom. Amanda said that her husband Saul had an affair. Since Saul and Simon are friends, Amanda knows that Simon suffers greatly without Emma. However, she believes she deserves a wealthier man, and Edward is perfect. The girls decided to get drunk after work to distract themselves. One of them had the urge to get a tattoo. Later, Emma sent a photo of the tattoo to Edward. When he returned, he was furious. It turned out that Emma had played a prank on Edward, and it was actually Amanda's tattoo. However, Edward did not appreciate the joke, accusing Emma of ruining everything. Seeing a dirty plate on the couch, Edward became even more furious. Emma wasn't following his rules. In response, she yelled that in real life, it's impossible for everything to always obey the rules. They had a huge argument. The next question on the survey was, does it upset you when things don't go according to plan? It's hard for Amanda to come to work every day and see her husband's lover there. Detective Clark called Emma and asked her to urgently come to the police station today. In a fit of rage, Edward started smashing the model of his future ideal city. He hates it when things go out of control. Jane, together with the consultant, went to the clinic where she had given birth and pointed out the medical staff's mistake to the chief doctor. All this time, Jane had blamed herself, but it turned out she was not at fault. The expert admitted that he noticed the discrepancy right away, but didn't tell Jane because it wouldn't bring Isabel back. However, it was important for Jane to know the truth. When Emma arrived at the police station, the chief inspector, in the presence of the detectives, stated that the video Nelson had been blackmailing her with was recorded 5 days before the robbery. In a hysterical fit, Emma admitted that Nelson was not the one in the video, but she couldn't say this in Simon's presence. However, Nelson did rob her, so he shouldn't be free. Emma was charged with perjury and arrested. She couldn't stop crying. Meeting with Detective Clark, Jane learned about Emma's arrest shortly before the tragedy. Clark said he genuinely wanted to help Emma and took a risk, but she deceived the police. After this incident, Clark retired. Jane did not expect to hear that after Emma's demise, Simon Wakefield was the main suspect because Emma had previously claimed her ex-boyfriend had a tendency toward aggression. Emma was allowed to speak with a lawyer who wanted to convince the judge that she perjured herself out of fear of her boyfriend. It would have been better if Emma had lied in court about Simon being prone to aggression. In the present, Detective Clark called it a clever move. The police deemed Emma's demise an accident and closed the case. Detective Clark got what he wanted. He put Nelson behind bars for the robberies. Jane doesn't believe it was an accident. Emma deserves justice. Jane met with Emma's psychotherapist again because she needed a professional opinion. Jane had no idea what to do about her pregnancy. Edward had never mentioned wanting to be a father again. He probably wouldn't be happy. Jane also felt that by deciding to keep the pregnancy, she was betraying Isabel. The doctor assured her that this was not the case and tried to convince Jane to leave Edward for her own safety and that of her future child. Visiting the website of the firm where Emma worked, Jane found Amanda's contact information and arranged to meet her. Amanda said that in the last few weeks before her demise, Emma had changed a lot. Jane asked for details, but Amanda didn't want to get involved. In the past, Emma heard strange noises. Suddenly, the smart house started going crazy, blasting loud music. It seemed like a glitch and lasted for several minutes. Jane feels it is her duty to get justice for Emma. Suddenly, the music turned on by itself, which scared Jane. In the past, when Emma stepped out of the house, some guy splashed red paint on her and insulted her before driving off. Emma called Detective Clark, but he didn't care. Now, if Emma wanted to report a crime, she had to call the police. Jane tracked down Detective Willen and asked if Edward had been a suspect in Emma Matthews' demise. The detective couldn't discuss this with an outsider. Jane had to say that she and Edward were expecting a baby. Jane wanted to know if she should be afraid of Edward. The detective assured her that Edward had an alibi. His partner confirmed that he was with Edward that day. For Edward, Jane continues to play the role of the perfect girlfriend. But in reality, Jane has started her own investigation. Nightmares continue to haunt her. When she woke up, she felt nauseous. Soon, it will be impossible to hide the pregnancy from Edward. Leaning down, she noticed a pearl on the floor similar to the ones on her necklace. Jane took it to a jeweler, who confirmed that the pearls were identical. It seemed that in the past, the necklace had broken and someone had rewoven it. It takes considerable force to break a silk thread. Jane called Simon, asking if Edward had given Emma any jewelry. Amanda told Emma that Saul's former lover, in revenge for their breakup, filed a complaint against him, and now he's on the verge of being fired. Emma doesn't understand how Amanda can stay on her husband's side after his infidelity. The friends argued. The next survey question was, how often do people let you down? Emma tried to call Edward, but he didn't answer. In the present, Simon recognized Emma's necklace. Jane didn't understand why Edward gave her the necklace of his former deceased girlfriend. Simon believed that Edward deliberately lured women into this house. Jane was shocked to learn that Edward's deceased wife and son are buried under the house. When she came home, Emma found Edward, who said that they were not right for each other. Emma brought chaos and disorder into his life, while he demanded strict adherence to rules. Emma begged Edward not to leave her, but he was adamant and demanded that she find a new place to live within a week. Edward left and Emma cried. Later, she calmed down a bit. Suddenly, the stove turned on by itself. Jane continues her investigation and met with Edward's former partner, who stated that the incident at the construction site was not an accident. Edward was furious that the wall was not placed where he wanted and demolished it with an excavator. Elizabeth and Max were on the other side. In Paul's opinion, Edward did it intentionally because Elizabeth wanted a divorce. Edward is the type of person who seeks to control everything. He built not a house but a crypt. Jane doesn't know what to think. In the past, coming home from work, Emma noticed that the front door was ajar. She loudly asked if anyone was there and saw a large red inscription on the wall that read, "Leave." Horrified, Emma called Detective Clark, but he told her to stop bothering him. In the home garden, Jane found 2 graves under the soil, Elizabeth and Max. Had she been living in a cemetery all this time, just like Emma once did? The next survey question was, how do you feel about making decisions based on emotions? Edward returned earlier than expected and found out about Jane's investigation. She confessed that she did not believe Emma's demise was an accident and intended to uncover the truth. Upon learning about Jane's pregnancy, Edward was not at all pleased. He hates when things deviate from his order. Jane's pregnancy was not part of his plans. Moreover, he thinks Jane is obsessed with Emma. Edward left. In the past, when Simon learned about Emma's situation, he agreed without hesitation to help her. Emma said that after breaking up with Edward, the house seemed to have turned against her. There was something else Emma wanted to tell Simon. Jane shared with Mia Edward's inadequate reaction to the news of her pregnancy. Jane still does not want to accept the fact that Edward is a psychopath. Emma confessed to her ex-boyfriend that some time ago, after a company party, she and Saul were drinking at a bar. Emma was flirting with him, but it was just a harmless game for her. When the bar closed, Saul suggested that Emma go to his hotel room. Emma doesn't even know why she agreed. There, Saul began to behave inappropriately. Emma didn't want this, but she was literally paralyzed with fear. Saul recorded everything on his phone. The next morning, Emma received the compromising video from him. She did not delete the video, intending to go to the police. But Emma was so ashamed in front of Simon and Amanda that she couldn't bring herself to do it. After all, everyone saw her flirting with Saul at the bar. When the police thought that the person in the video was the burglar, Emma did not deny it, fearing the truth would come out. Simon does not understand why Emma did not tell him about this right away. Together, they could have handled it. Now Simon wants to destroy Saul, but Emma wants to take matters into her own hands and report what happened to Human Resources. That way, Saul will definitely be fired. Simon told Emma that she could call him anytime if she needed anything. Thus, they reconciled. Emma went to her therapist again. Now she feels that she acted foolishly. Emma does not know if she is to blame for what happened, since that night, she was dressed provocatively and flirting with Saul. The doctor convinced Emma that she is the victim in this situation and has nothing to be ashamed of. At night, Nelson broke into the smart house where Emma lived, but he did not expect Simon to attack him from behind. Nelson fled. It turned out that Simon had been watching over the house all this time because he was worried about Emma. She didn't want to involve the police. Simon was going to stay the night to make sure Emma was safe. In the morning, Emma thanked Simon for everything. They hugged and he left. In the present, the smart house started acting up again, and the system automatically connected to Jane's laptop, who until that moment had no idea that there were surveillance cameras in every room. An angry Jane went to Edward's office and demanded an explanation. He assured her that no one had access to the cameras and that they were needed to detect residents' movements. Jane thinks that the cameras could have captured something on the night of Emma's demise, but Edward said that the house systems were turned off that day. Jane is sure this can't be just a coincidence. Edward's partner must have provided him with a fake alibi, and the pearl necklace is yet another proof of Edward's lies. He began to convince Jane that she had become paranoid and that there were originally 2 necklaces, but she no longer believes a word Edward says. At home, Jane called Simon and asked for his help. He brought her a bouquet of flowers and food. Simon managed to disable the surveillance cameras. Jane thinks that Edward's partner Peter Creed might also be involved in what happened to Emma. Someone had to help Edward and disable the smart house systems. At a crucial moment, Emma unexpectedly received messages from Edward, who wrote that he missed her very much and wanted to try a relationship with her again. In the present, Jane and Simon were having a pleasant conversation when she refused the wine, and Simon guessed she was pregnant. Jane only mentioned that she and Edward were not together. Simon once dreamed of starting a family and even planned to propose to Emma. Emma put on a beautiful dress and the necklace, expecting Edward. Seeing Simon, she asked how he got in, and it turned out that Simon had taken a spare bracelet from the realtor. Emma asked him to leave because she was expecting someone. Simon revealed that he had swapped the data on her phone the day before. It wasn't Edward who had texted her, but Simon pretending to be him. In the present, Simon asked Jane what kind of person she would like. Jane thought Simon was flirting with her and said she wasn't planning on any relationships in the near future. Simon turned it into a joke, stating that he was already seeing someone. Once Emma had moved into this house, hoping she could change there, but no, she remained the same. Suddenly, Simon asked Jane if she would give Edward a second chance if he called her back right now. In the past, Simon told Emma she should have ignored that message. Simon didn't understand why Emma chose Edward or Saul when no one loved her like he did. Emma tried to gently explain to Simon that they were not right for each other. Simon needed a completely different girl. Receiving a firm refusal, Simon lost his temper and attacked Emma, tearing her pearl necklace. Then he pushed Emma, and she fell down the stairs, passing away on the spot. Simon was in a state of shock. He didn't want this to happen. In the present, Jane realized everything. Edward was calling her phone, but Simon ordered her not to answer. Jane rushed upstairs and locked herself in the storage room. Simon tried to break down the door, and then began talking to Jane as if she were Emma. Simon called all women on Earth liars. After several more failed attempts to break down the door, Simon calmly said he had plenty of time. Pouring himself some tea, Simon continued talking to Jane through the door. He liked her from the first meeting because she reminded him so much of Emma. Since Jane stopped responding to him, Simon turned on the music and started smashing everything in the house. Jane had access to some of the house's systems, so she managed to turn off the lights. Simon started pouring gasoline everywhere. Taking advantage of a moment, Jane tried to escape, but Simon noticed her and chased after her. A fight ensued between them, during which Jane's pearl necklace broke. She pushed Simon down the stairs, taking his life. Jane called Edward and asked him to come over. There were 2 possible courses of action. They could set it up to look like self-defense, or they could lie to the police that Simon decided to voluntarily end his life at the same place as his beloved. If they told the truth about the circumstances of Emma's demise, the investigation could drag on for months. Jane was so sorry she suspected Edward. Despite everything, she intended to tell the truth in court. Emma deserved justice. Edward agreed, and they hugged. The last question of the survey was, if you start something, must you finish it? Jane and Edward reconciled. Saul was arrested at work for what he did to Emma. Today was an important day. Edward thought they shouldn't become parents just yet. They arrived at the clinic. In the past, shortly before the tragedy, Emma told her psychotherapist that a new house couldn't help anyone escape from the past because you remain the same person. Entering the doctor's office, Jane realized she couldn't go through with it. Asking the medical staff for a pen, she wrote a note for Edward and asked the nurse to give it to the man in the lobby, along with the smart home control bracelet. Half an hour later, Edward received the note. Jane wrote that she intended to become a mother. She also left Edward the contact information of Emma's psychotherapist. Maybe therapy would help him reconsider his attitude toward life and let go of the past. Jane wouldn't mind if Edward wanted to be involved in their child's life someday. Soon she got a new job and became a happy mother to a boy named Toby. But Jane also continues to cherish the memory of her daughter Isabel.